So, just as a preamble, this is particularly focused on fairy tales that have been told orally in Australia. And I think that if you're interested in working fairy tales into an Australian setting, you can do a lot worse than checking out some of the fairy telling styles that have been of people who have actually passed fairy tales down in the Australian tradition. There's one particular one I've been working with called The Witch's Tale, which is that you can actually get a recording of it sent to you from the National Library of Australia. Yeah, look it up. I'll give you a little bit more about it. This paper started off much longer, and I was hoping to talk about Jack and the Beanstalk as well as The Witch's Tale, but I've had to prune it quite seriously, and so I'm not sure how much time I'll get for Jack and the Beanstalk. I'm going to concentrate on The Witch's Tale. It's a wild and woolly ride through comparative mythology, so bear with me as I take you on a weird journey across time and space, and hopefully it'll shed some light on the figures in these stories. The title of the story, Stealing from the Sky, Stealing from the Underworld, comes from the two stories that both of them collected in Australia, Jack and the Beanstalk, collected by Joseph Jacobs in the 1860s from, I think, Cornish migrants living in South Australia. Obviously, he climbs up to the sky and steals lots of gold up there from the ogre. And then The Witch's Tale. Now, is anybody familiar with Simon MacDonald's telling of The Witch's Tale? Shame on you. All right, well, I will have to give you... don't think I can give you a complete synopsis because it's a very long and involved tale, and I've only got half an hour. But I will give you a sketch of the relevant motifs. Just as background, Simon MacDonald, he was Irish-Australian background in terms of the culture that he brought. He's a fiddle player and was recorded, and a singer, and he's most known as a singer of Australian bush songs. He also knew a lot of Irish rebel songs, and most people go and listen to him in the National Library recordings playing a fiddle or singing bush songs. But a gentleman, a folklore researcher and historian called Hugh Anderson, went and interviewed him for his life story, and this is the book that came out in 1972 or 71. And as an appendix, he included The Witch's Tale, which Simon MacDonald remembered from his youth. His father told it while he was growing up in a bark hut. He lived not far from Ballarat in Victoria, Springmount, near Creswick, and just for the I guess the Australian motifs in the fairy tale, it's definitely an Irish style fairy tale, but you can imagine it's being told by somebody who's never been out of Australia. He grew up in a bark hut, he worked as an agricultural labourer and a mining fossicker, and he could never afford to get out of Australia. He'd never seen Ireland. He probably didn't grow up with picture books of Ireland. So the imagination that he would have filled that story with was probably gum trees and Australian caves and rocks and things like that. So anyway, I say it's an Irish-Australian fairy tale. The plot points that are relevant to my later discussion are The basic idea is there are three brothers who are sent to steal a horse, or to get hold of a horse, from the underworld. And they've got no idea how to get there. So on their journey, they meet a mysterious character called the Gothy Duff. The Gothy Duff is an anglicisation. That name, or appellation, is an anglicisation of a Gaelic title, Gadi Dúv, which means black thief. And but in the MacDonald version of the story, he only ever calls him the Gothy Duff. There's no evidence that MacDonald spoke Gaelic. The Gothy Duff says, "Where are you off to?" And Jack, the youngest, says, "We're off to try and steal this horse." And the Gothy Duff says, "I've been after that horse for 7 years. I know the witches that look after this horse. There's a family of witches who guard the horse. I know the way down to the underworld, and I can turn myself into a rooster, and I'll help you steal the horse." And so he guides the three brothers into the underworld, and then he says, "Wait out here. I'll go into the stable and I'll try and get hold of this horse." And he goes into the stable, and of course, like in many horse-stealing fairy tales, he tries to get the bridle onto the horse, and the horse gives a neigh that shakes the world. And the witches wake up and try to rush into the stable to find out who's trying to nick their horse. But by then, the Gothy has turned himself into a rooster and flapped up onto a beam. And this happens 2 more times. But the third time, the mother of the witches puts on her thinking cap, which helps her think out anything in the world, and she says, "Go out and see, is there a strange rooster in the fowl house?" And the daughters go out and they catch the Gothy Duff round the neck and bring him inside. Squawk, squawk, squawk. And then they say, "Oh, you've got mates hiding out there," and they go out and catch the three brothers and bring them in. And then they're going to put them to death in some horrible manner, which MacDonald doesn't elaborate on, but there are Irish versions and Scottish versions and a Nova Scotian version, as well as a medieval French version of this story. And the Irish versions elaborate on the various different types of executions that various different stories put forward. But the Gothy manages to free all of the brothers and himself by telling stories. And in the Irish and Scottish versions, the Nova Scotian version, he tells 3 or 4 stories. MacDonald only includes one. He cuts to the chase and gets to the last story, in which the Gothy tells how he saved the life of a baby from being eaten by a cannibalistic giant. And there was a woman present, the mother of the baby, who had been told by the giant that she needed to do in her own child and things like that, and cook it up for his dinner. And the Gothy elaborates how he saved the life of this child. And when he comes to the close of his story, the mother of the witches says, "That was me. I was the mother. You saved the life of my daughter. And you can have the black entire. You know, your mates can go home with the black entire, and I'll give them my daughters into the bargain as witches." So, I mean, as wives, sorry. Witch wives. I'm glad my wife's not here for that little Freudian slip. So they stuck 3 spoons in the wall and drank tea till they were black in the face, and that's the end of the story. There's an interesting thing with all of the Irish stories, the stories that the Gothy tells in the Irish versions. They very often involve some sort of disguise. They show that he's made a career of stealing from supernatural beings, or closely escaping death from supernatural beings, and he regularly does it by disguising himself. And and there's a part of it where he, a number of them, he ends up being maimed somehow or other. Some, supernatural being slices off a hunk of flesh from his thigh, and he has to cut his own toe off and things like that. I'm just bringing those gory details up because they're relevant to my future discussion. So that's the story. I had this question of why do we have these heroic thieves? Jack and the Beanstalk has got Jack going off and stealing. He's, by conventional standards, behaving quite immorally. But we cheer for Jack. And here's this Gothy Duff. He's obviously a thief, but he's presented very sympathetically. And it's just from an Australian kind of pop culture perspective, 19th century pop culture, I suppose. The bushrangers were very celebrated by sections of the Australian populace anyway. And to this day, you see people passionately against or for Ned Kelly or the other bushrangers. Why are we celebrating this thief and murderer and things like that? So I approached this question, why is this thief character resonant for us? It's the journey's taken me through comparative mythology and shamanism and things, and one scholar who really helped with this question of mine has been mentioned by Kate just before, Walter Burkett, who wrote a fantastic essay called Heracles and the Master of the Animals, and in which he looks at myths, mostly involving Heracles, but also involving other characters like Indra from India, where the hero steals livestock, cattle and so on, sometimes horses, from other worlds, often the underworld, but sometimes another world out beyond the Pillars of Heracles or something like that. And this involves overcoming a supernatural guardian. Burkett then looks at shamanic traditions all around the world and finds that they very often involve very similar kind of narrative motifs in which the shaman either goes on a trance journey or ritually dramatises a journey in which he or she encounters a guardian of the animals and has to overcome them somehow, either defeat them through combat or pass tests set by them, and then ritually bring back the animals so that the tribe they represent can hunt or fish or gather them in the case of plants. And so Burkett draws this connection between shamanic tradition and ancient mythology. Then there's Hilda Ellis Davidson. Now, she's a fairy tale scholar and an expert on Northern European mythology. And I'm just going to read you a quote. She wrote a wonderful essay in this book. If anybody hasn't got this book, this is just really worth its weight in gold.
Can you project a little bit more clearly?
Yeah, sure.
Quickly, and it's a little bit hard to hear exactly what you're saying.
Okay, okay.
For instance, what was the first name of the lady you just mentioned, Davidson?
Hilda Ellis Davidson. And hopefully I will have this kind of whipped into some sort of shape, and it can be published online and maybe linked with the AFTS website. But the essay is called Helpers and Adversaries in Fairy Tales, and Ellis Davidson looked at particularly supernatural helpers and adversaries. Thank you. I've got my beauty spot happening. Yeah, good. All right. So after studying all of these different helpers and adversaries, she comes to the concluding section, and I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from that. She says, both helpers and adversaries can be supernatural figures, and this is an important point to be recognised. It seems possible that the tales contain memories of earlier traditions of journeys to the other world, as well as those of supernatural powers who may guide or hinder. There appear also to be memories of supernatural rulers of the wild creatures. So this is just interesting to me, studying the story of the Gothy Duff, where there's the witches who are guarding this horse. Such helpful yet dangerous figures were known in early northern Eurasia, and this gives a possible explanation of the strong emphasis on animal helpers in the tales. And the animal helpers, obviously, I'm thinking of the rooster transformation, and the Gothy Duff, I think, stands in the same sort of archetypal position in the narrative as, say, the fox in the Grimm's Golden Bird, or in the Russian Firebird story, there's a wolf in the same position. Animal helpers. The shaman depended on such helpers for his journeys, his or her journeys to the other world, and his or her spirit guides were in the form of birds or animals. And the strong emphasis on long and perilous journeys in the tales is characteristic of shamanistic tradition, as are the episodes in which the journeying figure is maimed or killed and then restored to life and health. In the initiatory dreams of a shaman, he or she may be cut to pieces, cooked and eaten or swallowed by a monster. And such dreams are accepted as evidence that he is destined, or he or she is destined to be a shaman. So I just found that very juicy, considering how many times in these stories the Gothy Duff gets maimed. Don't know how I'm doing for time. Give me a... Okay. I'll do a quick whip through some other resonances. So I was particularly intrigued by the rooster, and because I knew that there was a shamanic tradition in the southwest of China amongst the Miao people, and I think the Miao people are very closely related to the Hmong people who are in Vietnam and Laos and Thailand, and they have a lot of rooster symbolism, but the shamans in those traditions use the rooster as protection when they go on other world journeys, and the rooster is regarded as a messenger figure between sky and earth, or other world and natural world. And there's an essay by Zhang Hongfeng which goes into the rooster in Miao tradition. And this brought to mind a story in J.F. Campbell's Popular Tales of the West Highlands, in which there is a changeling story, and a smith whose son is taken by the fairies, and he has to go into a fairy mound to get his son back, and he takes with him a rooster, a crowing rooster. He takes a Bible as well, but the Bible doesn't seem to faze the fairies too much. But the crowing rooster does. As soon as the rooster starts crowing, the fairies can't get rid of the smith and his son soon enough. So I just feel like, even though they're the opposite ends of Eurasia, there is a definite connection between Miao shamanic tradition and Celtic tradition there. The other rooster connection is in Babylon. Ancient Babylonian mythology had a figure called Papsukal, who is the messenger of the gods, and he's always accompanied by a rooster. And interestingly, he is instrumental in the liberation of Ishtar from her imprisonment in the underworld. So, and he's a messenger god of the sky god Anu. So this brings me to the messenger of the gods in Greek and Roman tradition, Hermes, who, interestingly, is also a patron of thieves. And because he stole the cattle of Apollo. And Hermes becomes Mercury in Roman tradition, and then in the Middle Ages and Renaissance period, Mercury was taken up as a symbol by the alchemists for this intermediary between heaven and earth, between masculine and feminine. He's the sort of father of the hermaphrodite, and bringing together, the alchemists were trying to bring together sort of spirit and matter through chemical experiments, so bringing together gold and lead and sulphur and salt. And he's just this intermediary between polarities. And so as I sort of meditated on all of these things, I felt that the common factor is there's this trickster element in a lot of the shamans, the thieves, the messenger figures of the gods. They're mercurial. They act as intermediaries. And somehow their behaviour creates elements of chaos. It mixes up the usual order of things and breaks through inertia and gets things moving. And so often theft is part of this chaos. Hermes steals cattle, Heracles steals cattle, Prometheus steals fire, and so does Wa the crow, who's the cool and the Victorian myth of Wa the crow, who steals fire from the Pleiades. Even in Chinese tradition, there's Sun Wukong, who's the monkey king, who goes to heaven and steals the elixir and peaches of immortality. It's another trickster thief figure. Jack steals gold, and the Gothic Duff steals a horse. The bushrangers also stole gold and horses. And it's interesting that Simon MacDonald remembered this story of all the stories that his dad told him, because perhaps he felt there was a sort of it resonated with that kind of Australian popularity of bushrangers because of the horse stealing. But it's interesting that celebration of bushrangers, why were they celebrated? Why are these mythological thieves celebrated? And perhaps at an unconscious level, we're recognising an archetypal symbol in these thieves, and we take a secret delight in the chaos that they bring, and in the redistribution of wealth, perhaps monetary wealth in the case of the bushrangers, but also between the haves and the have-nots, but also perhaps between spiritual world and material and temporal worlds. And even while our positive reaction does not necessarily make sense to the literalist, more rigid parts of our mind, we still have that inward thrill that unconsciously recognises the benefit of that churn, that chaotic process which gets things moving. So that's me. Thanks.